Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee this morning. I now like to declare open this hearing of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee into the Veterans' Entitlements, Treatment and Support, Simplification and Harmonisation Bill of 2024. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are watching on the proceedings today via the Parliament House website. Now, these are public proceedings being streamed live via the Parliament House website, and a Hansard transcript is also being made. I'd like to remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which it is so claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. I'd like to now welcome representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Good morning.
Morning.
The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of an officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses given evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. Thank you very much. Now, for the Hansard record, could I ask that you please state your full name and the capacity in which you all appear today? Mr Kefford, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Kefford, Deputy Secretary, Policy and Programs.
Luke Brown, First Assistant Secretary, Policy Division, DVA.
Simon Hill, Assistant Secretary, Legislative Reform.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, do you have an opening statement by any chance, Mr.
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'll do is I'll now hand over the call to Senator Lambie, who will kick off today's proceedings. Senator Lambie, you've got the call.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. I think I'm just trying to get some answers here of why this, I guess the question is why the bill was completed before the recommendations were actually given out. So is there any part of those recommendations that will now affect the bill out of the 122 of them that you can pick up?
Senator, so the answer to the first question is the Royal Commission in its interim report sets some ambitious but reasonable timeframes for the passage of this bill, which is about recommendation 1 from the interim report, the Harmonisation and Simplification recommendation. The Royal Commission in that recommendation would have liked the provisions of this legislation to be operational by 1 July 2025. We have not met that date, and I think for very good reasons, mostly to do with the consultation process that's occurred to give the veteran community confidence in the provisions of the bill. In relation to, so that's the reason that the bill has progressed on the time frame that it has. In relation to your second part of the question, we have had a look at, obviously, the final report which was delivered to government on Monday. Our initial assessment is that none of the recommendations cut across the content of the bill. There are some issues raised in relation to, for example, recommendation 90. There's a reference to a permanent impairment compensation differential. That is given expression in a legislative instrument, not in the primary legislation, so not affected by the bill. there are some recommendations that would require legislation if the government was to accept and implement those recommendations. The ones that come to mind is there's a recommendation, I can't remember the number, Senator, but around extending the veteran payment to physical conditions. It's a payment that's paid pre-liability where someone has a mental health claim. That would require legislation to give effect to that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in this bill. There's another recommendation which talks about opt-in arrangements for household services and some more autonomy for veterans in the way that they receive household services packages. Depending on how the government responded to that, that may require some legislation as well, but again, not directly affected by the bill, which is currently before the Parliament.
Okay, and what about, so this be the case, why are we waiting 22 months for this to be implemented? Is there a reason this can't be brought forward? Has this got to do with the ICT systems, has it?
No, that is one consideration. It's not the primary consideration. I mean, we've been very careful to ensure that people understand that the outcomes that will result from a claim being lodged today would be very different once or if the bill passes through Parliament. We want the veteran community to have time to understand the differences between the current arrangements and what the outcomes will be under the new arrangements, and therefore make informed decisions about claims that they might want to lodge now under the current arrangements. And we don't want to push it too far ahead because there's obviously benefits, great benefits in the bill itself. So we don't want people to wait too long before they can access entitlements that would flow under those beneficial arrangements. But there are groups of people that will want to have claims lodged so that it can be resolved under the current arrangements. We also need to work with the advocacy community to make sure that they understand the changes and can assist people through that transitional period in terms of implementing the new arrangements if the bill passes through Parliament.
Wouldn't you be better off bringing that forward though so you can transition, so you can get that moving and still running the other acts? I'm just trying to... there is a lot of lag time here.
There is, Senator. The purpose, as Mr Brown's outlined, is to enable this to be implemented in a way where there is time to explain what's going on, so that, and the Minister's been quite clear in some of the public discussions around the consultation that we want to deliberately leave time for people to make an informed decision to apply under the old acts as distinct from under the new one. In terms of your particular question about ICT, because what's proposed in the bill is essentially harmonising in MERCA, there's not a full-blown IT system build because we're harmonising into a system that's already operating. There will be some amendments because there's different eligibilities, but IT is not a key driver of the timing. The timing is about training, explanation, engaging with advocates and particularly engaging with veterans, as Mr Brown's outlined. Okay, but if memory serves me right, no veteran will be worse off with the move. So once again, I'm just trying to... It's just very clunky. I would have just thought, you know, the sooner you could get it set up, the sooner you could get people using into that system and leaving these others open. So you're telling me, so they can sit here for the next 22 months and use the same acts that are there now until 1st of July 1st of January 2026.
1st of July.
1st of July, sorry. Yes.
Senator, I suppose what I would say is being respectful of the parliamentary process without knowing when the legislation might pass, our advice is that there is a period of time for us to train our staff, to allow people deliberately, and you're right, the provisions as set out in the bill mean that the entitlements and benefits to which people are entitled now continue, and new applications after the commencement date are made under the harmonised legislation. Having said that, there is still a view deliberately that people will want to make an assessment of the bill that's passed by the Parliament and determine are they better off to apply under the existing 3 acts versus waiting for the new arrangement. So the timing is about a orderly transition and time for us to train our staff, for us to engage with advocates, and for veterans to take advice on where they might be, whether they wish to apply under the old acts or the new ones.
For the next 22 months?
that's the schedule that the government's laid out, Senator, yes.
Okay, what does the training look like for the department? What does the training of your members look like?
Well, Senator,
for the changeover?
It's ongoing.
I'm just trying to work it out because this is supposed to make things easier. It's supposed to make it a lot less clunky. This is what it's supposed to do, a lot more orderly. So I would have thought they'd been trained across these acts to a certain degree. So what does the training look like?
Well, they are trained across the acts, Senator, but there's also a process at the moment of training across 3, which is why the harmonised arrangement is easier, because there is then 1. That's an ongoing process that starts when people first join the department, and there's regular refreshers, and we're doing work at the moment to actually increase the formality of that training to constitute them as proper certificate level courses to provide both better support for our people but also greater confidence in our training systems. The training function is an ongoing one and needs to be, both in terms of how particularly the different application of the new regime to individual circumstances, and that needs to be a function that is continuing. I think in some respects the communication is as important with the veteran community as it is with our own people.
Is there any reason that some of these benefits could be dished out as soon as that goes through? It doesn't have to wait, like let's go the funeral expenses, the increase in that, the private vehicle reimbursements. Is there a reason why they can't start from the 1st of January next year if you get that bill through?
Well, Senator, they would start when the legislation commences. There's no mechanism to do it before the legislation commences.
No, that's what I'm saying. Right, okay.
So, for example, the proposal...
No, I'm just asking you. So we can't start them...
Well,
there are things that you can start that you don't need to change, or things that have been increased. Why are they waiting?
Well, what I was about to say, Senator, is there is a component of the bill relating to the appeal processes that does commence before the rest of the legislation. So it is possible for that to happen, but that's not what's proposed in the bill that's before the Parliament.
That'd be the same as going to the VRB and allowing that. Why do we have to wait that long?
Well, that is the provision that is commencing sooner, as Mr Kefford just indicated. That access to the Veterans Review Board for DIRCA claims commences 60 days after royal assent, so that doesn't wait until 1 July 2026.
Okay, so if we can do that, why can't we start other benefits that don't seem to have an issue? I think that would be useful. Okay. And does somebody want to explain to me why veterans will be better off under this legislation?
At a broad level, Senator, veterans will be better off because there will be a single ongoing act which will govern their entitlements to compensation and rehabilitation rather than the patchwork of 3 acts with confusing transitional provisions and different outcomes depending on periods of service, which is the approach that governs the interaction between the 3 acts. Now, the benefits for veterans varies depending on what coverage they have at the moment. So, for example, veterans who only have VEA access at the moment will benefit under the MERCA from more flexibility in the way that they can take compensation payments. The VEA is a pension-only system. From 1 July 2026, those veterans will be able to take their permanent impairment payments as a lump sum if they choose to do so. If they don't choose to do so, they can continue to receive those payments as tax-free periodic payments for life, like they do under the VEA, but there's that flexibility to cater to their own circumstances there. For VEA veterans as well, there is a purely economic loss compensation payment named incapacity payments, which is based on their pre-injury normal earnings. They don't have access to those kinds of payments currently under the VEA. For VEA partners, the compensation that is paid in respect of a death of a veteran is greater than what's available under the VEA, and that applies to the children of veterans as well. For DIRCA veterans, the main benefits are access to those elements of the repatriation system which recognise the unique nature of military service, so things like gold cards, a special rate disability pension and education scheme those sorts of benefits aren't available to DERCA-only veterans at the moment. There are also benefits in terms of transitioning to incapacity arrangements under the MERCA. For DERCA veterans, there's a 5% notional superannuation deduction that doesn't apply under the MERCA, which is applied under the DERCA. And there is, for former full-time serving members, a remuneration loading allowance that's added to incapacity payments. For veterans that are currently already MERCA only, there's a number of benefits in the bill, including the new additional disability adjustment, which will be a safety net payment post-pension age, improvements to the way that we do date of effect for permanent impairment. There's a number of enhancements and improvements to the MERCA itself, but the main benefit for those veterans will be that they'll be dealing with a department that doesn't have the enduring overheads that we have now in administering 3 pieces of legislation and the complexity that invites into the system.
And if I might add to that, Senator, it was the Royal Commission itself in the interim report remarked on the fact of the complexity of a 3-act system contributes to the stresses that surround our system. So beyond the efficiency and capacity that comes from only having to administer 1 act, the removal of complexity on its own was highlighted as a key driver for the first recommendation in the interim report.
And will any veteran be worse off? Are there sticky points?
In the sense that payments that they previously received or are in receipt of will not be affected by the commencement of the arrangements or any subsequent claims under the new arrangements. They will not be worse off. The only exception to that is the incapacity payments, which I've already mentioned, which will transition into MERCA arrangements, which will be beneficial. The outcomes for some veterans will be different for future claims compared to today, and that's the reason why we want to give people time to understand that, Senator. So, for example, under the DERCA, for permanent impairment claims, there's no application of what's called a whole-of-person impairment methodology under the DERCA, but there is under the MERCA, and there is under the VEA, and there is under most compensation jurisdictions, at least all that I'm aware of. That whole-of-person impairment methodology allows us to come up with a whole-of-person impairment rating, which allows us to do assessments for things like gold cards and special rate disability pension, but it does affect the quantum of permanent impairment that may be paid. It'll change in different circumstances, so we need people to understand that. Now, that's no detriment in terms of it's not affecting any payments that they've received now or in the past, but the outcomes will be different, and people will make choices about, well, I would prefer an extra a few $1,000s in my lump sum compared to a gold card. There's some subjectivity in that.
Okay. I don't know if you just touched on this. Sorry, Luke. Sorry, Mr. Brown. The DERCA recipients, could they? Is there a possibility they could be worse off under the whole person assessment under this new legislation?
There's a possibility that they will get less permanent impairment compensation for a MERCA claim than they would today under a DERCA claim.
All right.
With a trade-off, Senator, that they will
What's
have eligibility for other auxiliary benefits that they do not currently have that are more aligned with the repatriation system. So things like access to a gold card, access to safety net payments, access to education schemes for their children, all eligibilities that they do not currently have.
Access to increased incapacity payments too, which are the periodic payments which are income replacement that meet basic costs of living, food, house, roof over the head, those sorts of things.
Okay. The advocates. How long is it going to take you to train them? How are you getting more on the ground?
So, Senator, there's a couple of parts to that, and conscious also that the Royal Commission went into this space in its report that we received on Monday. We have at the moment on public consultation a proposal that's been worked up with advocates through a working group to create what we're proposing to call the Institute for Veterans Advocates, so a professional association for advocates. There are a number of benefits of this organisation. One goes to training and supervision of the ATDP program. It goes to recognition. Approved advocates under the scheme will have greater access to our systems and potentially to streamline processing. There's two parts to that. One is to encourage people to continue to serve as advocates, and as I say, I'll just simply note the recommendation around the funding of advocates in the Royal Commission's final report on Monday. The other part of this will allow us to exercise greater scrutiny of people who are not trained advocates, and potentially at least some of them charging fee for service or taking a percentage of veteran statutory entitlements in return for their services, and to ensure that, and it's a clear intent of establishing this body, that there is a supply of properly trained, independent but connected to DVA advocates to support veterans to navigate the system.
Okay, sorry. So what is this system, what do these advocates look like in 12 months' time? Are you guys still working on that? Because obviously that's a recommendation from the Royal Commission. Yep. Okay.
So leaving aside what was in the in the report, which essentially went to how it's the best grants is the current program for funding the ESO advocates, and so there's a recommendation about the nature of that in the report on Monday. What we would like to see is a larger cohort of better trained and better supported advocates. We're also supplementing that by a program that we've been running in Perth and are about to start rolling out nationally, of using our delegates and client support officers to work alongside advocates. So we've had some of our staff from the Perth office attending the RSL and attending the house at Swanbourne to sit with the advocates and assist veterans and families to actually navigate my service. So we're making a range of efforts in that space. That's been very successful and very well received on both sides in Perth, and so we're looking to expand that. The end goal, Senator, is that with a combination of a simpler system and better supports and ideally better systems, there is less demand for people to require an advocate to make a claim. But if they choose to do so, where we would like to get to is that there is a stock of properly trained advocates who provide that service at no charge to the veteran, so that they are able to receive the entirety of their statutory entitlements.
So I think in a world of gold, we'd like them actually on the bases and properly trained, and probably people that have been hurt, and Defence can keep them in. What's Defence doing about this? Because honestly, it is their issue, and it would make it easier for people, I'm sure, that have their claims processes done and completed before they got out of the military, as to not carry that burden out with them. Sure,
and so, Senator, I mentioned the claims support program. Obviously, the veteran support officers on base, we're looking to expand, and again, that without going into too much of what was in the report on Monday, the proposals around transition and the reallocation of responsibility for support at transition are relevant to this conversation as well. So Defence have been part of the discussions around the advocacy working group, but that's in that particular context with us. So essentially what we DVA are looking to do is to take whatever stress we can and pressure out of that process by providing our own support, by having properly trained advocates, whether or not they are paid by the organisation, providing services free to veterans, and that they are supported and connected with us. And there's a benefit for us in that too, in the sense that if we have a member of this proposed body that has been properly trained, has had their continuing professional development, and we're used to dealing with and they understand our system, it allows us to streamline the processing, because we're confident that when it arrives, the claim will have been filled in properly, it will have the right supporting information. To your point about transition, we're also looking at mechanisms to bring forward some of the commissioning of testing, and at that particular point of transition where people are injured, it's already the case that it's something like 90% have at least the initial liability settled before separation, and most of the cases where the separation occurs before that is not where there's cases of medical discharge, but when they're choosing to go and they have jobs to go to. So we're very conscious of ensuring, to your point, that no one is leaving Defence that doesn't have the wraparound supports in place.
So does this? I did hear one of you say before. Does this legislation that doesn't clear out those cowboys out there, does it? That's overcharging and saying they're experts, etc. In that legal.
The legislation has no impact on that particular issue.
Okay.
We are approaching that from the perspective of program management and program integrity, but also at the moment we have no ability to direct someone to use a particular advocate because we've got no way of certifying and distinguishing. Having this professional body allows us to say, here is the list of DVA approved advocates who won't charge you a commission from your entitlement, who you can trust because they have been trained, properly, and that then allows us to, from that perspective, to promote that in the veteran community, but also that when we receive a claim lodged by one of those advocates, because we'll be able to identify them in our system, to apply a streamlined processing approach because we know they will have done it properly.
Right. Do all the advocates out there at the moment, whether it doesn't matter what level they are, do they get to make? You have a cell set up in there where it's just deals with the advocates that are doing these. Is that set up in DVA? Do you know what I mean? Because
in the
instead of waiting online, that sort of thing, can they get through?
That's intended to be part of this arrangement in terms of the access that they get to visibility of what's happening in our systems, as well as a direct kind of hotline, for want of a better phrase. We've counted in this paper that we've released for discussion. At the moment, the answer to your direct question is no, that's not how it works, but that's where we're heading in the sense of having an arrangement where, again, an approved advocate is able to see inside our systems more than people can at the moment, and processes, and secondly, to have a direct contact line to say, can I, to talk to the delegate, can I talk to you about this, please? So, but again, we need a gate to set that up so that we can say, if you're an approved advocate, here's the access, and we can say to veterans, if you're using one of our approved advocates, this is the benefit for you.
How long do you expect that set up? I asked this, Mr Kefford, because I'm sure that you're aware that Labor, when they come in, which I'm very grateful for, set me up with an angle like that so I could go to one or two contacts within DVA, because we usually get a couple each day. That has been extremely helpful, because I'd say that 90% of those people that have been through have had issues with their claims. Yep. There is 10%. It's just like about 10% of them go, no, that's it, and you go, yeah, okay, that's fine, I've checked that, but there has been issues with decisions made with DVA, and I just think it's been extremely useful, and it's probably saved some lives, to be honest with you.
Well, thank you for saying so, Senator. The process that I've outlined in terms of the consultation, we've worked it up through a working group established under the ESO roundtable. We've asked for comments back by the 3rd of October. On that paper.
Can I just add to that too, Senator? And it gets back to your earlier question about what's the training if you're moving to a sort of an act that's been in operation for 20 years. 40% of our determinations per year roughly are still under the old acts, and we still have to invest in training VA and DIRCA delegates. The kind of single touch point arrangements that you're talking about will be so much easier under a harmonised system as well, where we don't. There's a lot for a single staff member in DVA to get their head around. If we can reduce the legislative complexity, it promotes an environment where we have less touch points in the department as well.
And are you hoping that same the way you're doing that with the advocates, that it would be very helpful too with the parliamentarians if they've only they have a veteran go in there, make a complaint, where they can go straight one-on-one and speak to a person. I mean, it is very complex legislation. We all know that. Hopefully this will work. Something's got to give. We're going to have some bumps along the road. There's no doubt. But are you looking at that as well? Because I'm sure that would save those parliamentarians sending them to me, which would be helpful. Which I don't mind, but and it's fine. Yep. I understand the system and it is complicated. I realise that, but just having that. Will you open it up for them, whether it's state or federal, so they can?
I think, Senator, there's no reason why we couldn't have those sorts of channels established, particularly if we have this trained cohort sitting around it. Yes, because at the end of the day, as you quite rightly outline, we all want this process to go through as smoothly and quickly as it properly can. And yes, there's a process to go through in terms of the statutory decision making, but at the same time, the better the claim is when it arrives, the quicker we can turn it around.
Okay. I just want to come, obviously the Royal Commission's recommendations to address the issues around the rights and appeals, which was a recommendation 32, the role of advocates like you're just speaking at 99, 103 and 104, and the transitional management. They don't sort of come into play in this, do they? Oh, I'm just trying to work out the rights of appeal. I think we're all just a little bit hesitant because we're rushing this harmonisation through, yet we are yet to get any public response in reference to the recommendations of the final report from the government. Yeah. And I think this is quite scary because it's not like we're ploughing in. I can see the big picture, but we're ploughing in without hitting these other areas or without hearing whether or not what recommendations the government is actually going to support, which would be useful for the harmonisation, I guess. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, Senator, and I suppose...
I'm just a bit... It's very clunky. Do you know what I mean? Because we don't know what recommendations the government's going to support, basically.
Sure. And look, I would point out, and I know there's been discussion, including in the Senate last night, about timelines for this. We are working on it to respond. I think the Deputy Prime Minister said shortly, our Minister said urgently. It's something that we are moving on quickly, but obviously that's a matter for the government. In relation to 32, I don't think that's relevant. I read 32 as being a process that's inside defence and not relevant to DBA. Okay. So that seems to me to be talking about, remember, services being terminated for a particular reason. So while that's relevant to us, that's not relevant to anything in our legislation.
But the advocates are, because there's recommendations in there about advocates and that, and yet no one's told us whether the government's going to how they're going to react with this.
In terms of
bill.
Well, again, in terms of what I've been describing for advocates, we would contain that for our engagement around advocacy in the claims process and advocacy in what we describe as welfare advocacy within DBA. So again, if it's inside the defence processes, then that's not something to which I've been referring this morning.
Oh.
If you're referring to the recommendation regarding best funding, Senator, that I don't think that would need a provision in this bill. I mean, it's early days. We got the report on Monday. This is an initial assessment. That best funding is currently paid. To me, that reads as an increase to increase the number of paid advocates. I don't see the legislative requirement behind that, but as I say, something that we need to continue to think about.
And as Mr Brown said the other day, in terms of what's relevant in the bill that's in front of the Parliament now, we don't think there's anything in what was published on Monday that changes that, recognising that what's in front of the Parliament is the response to recommendation 1 of their interim report. So best funding we do now is a grants program. As part of the working group discussions, one of the issues that has been raised with us and may well have been raised with you, Senator, is at the moment those grants are an annual process. One of the suggestions that has been made in a range of contexts has been it would be preferable for those ESOs that employ their advocates, still provide the services free to veterans, but actually employ the advocates to have greater certainty of funding is one of the things that's been raised with us. That may be relevant to the considerations of the recommendation that was in the final report on Monday, but we do best now, and it's doesn't hang off any of the 3 acts.
Okay. All right. But so we still don't know, because it's not going to start, we can't do anything with those things that could be put into place right now. Like I said, the funeral allowance, the private vehicle reimbursements, government's not talking about bringing that sort of stuff forward. I mean, if you're going to put the bill through the House, it's sitting there. but it doesn't enact, but you can't split them out and enact them?
Senator, as I said before, it would be possible to do that, but that's not what the bill that's before the Parliament at the moment says.
I'll split them out myself. We'll take the vote on them. Anyway, okay. All right. What improvements does, if any, does this bill make to support veterans' transition from defence to civilian life? Does this doesn't touch the transition at all? Yeah.
There's no. I'm just thinking through the MERCA. There's no provisions relating to transition specifically in the MERCA. There are provisions in the MERCA around rehabilitation, which is an important part of transition. There are provisions in the MERCA which allow DVA to essentially reach in prior to discharge to essentially make the Commission the rehab authority as opposed to the CDF, and also some provisions around us providing treatment earlier. They are pre-existing provisions in the MERCA now, and the bill does nothing to change that.
Except to expand who they apply to.
Yep.
So from the passage of the legislation, 1st July 26, everyone will be a MERCA veteran, every new claim. So therefore, those provisions that exist to allow us to provide access to treatment earlier at the Commission's expense, and transition support services, so rehab services and the like, will be uniform for all discharging members.
Yeah, so most members transitioning these days, Senator, obviously would already be under the MERCA, but it's not. There are still cases where we have people leaving the ADF who have older legislation conditions, VEA conditions, for example, DERCA conditions. Particularly for VEA veterans, from 1 July 2026, they'll be moving into a piece of legislation which has a much more intensive rehab focus, which will be of benefit in the transition process. But I think the answer to your question is there's nothing directly. It's about some of the supports that are put in place around transition.
What's your highest cohort under the VEA? What is that age of the cohort? What's your largest age there in that VEA? What does that look like? Do you know what I mean? Because you'd have guys in there from the Middle East. You've obviously got your Vietnam veterans that are under it. What?
The figures I've got in front of me at the moment, 22, 23 figures, Senator, and in terms of claims lodged under the VEA in that financial year, it was about 4,200. About 4,700 determined. I mean, just in terms of the cohorts,
the VEA cohort. What's the largest cohort?
The VEA goes right up to 2004, so you've got early, the early East Timor, you've got early Afghanistan, you've got early Iraq, still covered under the VEA.
All right.
So those sorts of cohorts are still moving through. The VEA covers peacetime service for people who rendered peacetime service only between 1972 and 1994, with some residual coverage after that too. So there's still a considerable peacetime-only cohort with VEA coverage that would be moving through the system as well.
Okay, and what does the department's... is the department fit for purpose to administer the bill, taking into account processing times to determine and administer claims and entitlements? What does that look like?
Well, Senator, the government's made significant investment in the capacity and scale of our processing part of the department over the last several budget cycles, including in the most recent budget, where there was something like 140 million for additional staff. We have, in response to the interim report, cleared the backlog of unallocated claims. So we're now managing those. We receive about 2,000 a week, and so we're managing those within reasonable times.
Sorry, so these are the new claims that you're getting in now?
Yes.
Most of them are done within a period of time?
For example, Senator, the initial liability claims under MERCA that we've received since the 1st of December, we're processing in about 70 days. That's as it finalised. the new data on time taken to process that we'll be publishing later today still has an average time that's around 300 something days. Now that's because we're dealing with the older cases, because as I said, we've cleared the unallocated claims. We're working still through the tail of claims that have been on hand for some time. But we have the capacity. The other decision the government made in the budget this year was to provide us with demand-driven funding. So essentially the scale of our operation is driven by the volume of claims on hand. What we have also seen which is a very different picture to what it would have been even 12 months ago, just over half our claims are now less than 200 days old, recognising that our target under the Veterans Recognition Act is to decide them in 90. So we've still got some distance to go, but about half the claims are now less than 200 days old. Another quarter are less than a year old, so there is still an old tail, and we're doing our best in directing effort to solve those, but we are getting much closer to processing on time. And as I say, for those claims that we have received since this increased investment in our capacity for IL decisions, we're making them in 70 days, which is inside the statutory guidance in the Veterans Recognition Act.
So those people out there that are waiting 300, 400 days, what is the emphasis on getting those done as quickly as possible? Why are we still sitting on that amount of days? Wouldn't you have thought you'd have brought those guys up to the front pack and sorted them?
Senator, we're doing both. We're doing both so that we don't continue to perpetuate, because of the scale. So we've gone to, the government added 500 additional staff to the process, and then again with the demand-driven funding. What we're seeking to do is stay on top of the claims that are coming in while we deal with the tail of these older claims. We are directing teams and efforts to process those. There's a mix of reasons why they might be that old, and we're very actively managing those cases at the moment. In some circumstances, the delay relates to provision of information to us. In other cases, we just haven't got to it, and so we're actively managing each of those now. And there are teams inside the processing part of Client Benefits Division that are directing effort at dealing with those oldest claims.
Okay, what does it look like? Are those many of those people actually waiting because we're waiting on specialist reports, etc., etc.? What does that look like right now?
Senator, there's a range of, and I don't have the detail in front of me. We are able to and offer to veterans to assist in arranging appointments if that's necessary, if that's the hold up in accessing services. So there's a range of ways we can respond to that. But one of the things we say when we go back on these old cases, when we write to the veteran, is if you need assistance in finding a specialist, then please let us know and we'll try and help. And recognising there are other mechanisms, including our prior approvals process, where where the fee may be insufficient to get access. There are mechanisms to seek prior approval for higher fees.
Okay.
On that too, Senator, I'll take the opportunity to make a comment that one of the burdens that we put on specialists and other people doing compensation reports for us at the moment is that we have to ask them a range of questions to cater to 3 pieces of legislation. We will be able to simplify the range of questions that we ask providers going forward, simplify our forms and cause less annoyance and aggravation, which hopefully, where there is some kind of reluctance to take on a veteran for the purposes of doing some compensation work, that we start to wear that down through a simpler system.
Okay.
And in addition to only having one act, we're already doing work on simple things like streamlining our forms. So we've taken literally hundreds of pages out of our medical forms where we were asking for information that was not strictly required or necessary or continue to be used. We're also looking to provide those forms electronically and in a way that it integrates with the doctor's practice software. So just seeking to take any opportunity we can to take friction out of the system so that doctors are more inclined to engage with veterans and with our processes and make it easier for them to do so. There are technology capability limits given the age of our system that put a barrier on how far we can go, but certainly the approach that we are taking and the government's encouraging us to take is to go as far as we can down that path ahead of any other decisions on that front.
So what do the ITC systems look like? Like what? So you're rebuilding a brand new one?
No.
Oh.
There is one exception to that, Senator, in terms of a transport system that we're building.
Okay.
So generally the changes are, there's a re-platforming we have to do of a legacy system too. Our internal processing system, ISH, needs to have some amendments made to it. So does our client-facing digital channel, My Service, because it obviously they talk about 3 acts.
Yeah.
And they have rules that guide delegates and claimants through whether, the act's likely to be going down a VA or DERCA investigation path or a MERCA investigation path. So need to do some internal work in those systems. One of the things the bill is doing is allowing any veteran, even veterans grandparented under old acts, so for example VA veterans who stay on disability compensation payments under the VA, they'll be able to claim private vehicle transport to treatment reimbursement under the MERCA at a higher rate without a round trip requirement to access that reimbursement. Currently our MERCA and DERCA reimbursement processing is manual, so we are building a new system to assist the people that do that transport processing, because that workload, if it was all to flow through from the VA...
It'll also assist veterans in terms of their claiming process.
Yeah, hopefully we have some front door improvements for veterans claiming those reimbursements. Our special rate disability processing and our compensation in respect of service-related deaths processing under the MERCA is still done in our legacy system. We are taking the opportunity in these reforms to re-platform that old legacy system and improve the processing system there too.
Okay, would it not be easy so you're not... I mean, you've got this timeline where you're changing over, that's it, everything's going to be cut off. Why didn't we just start it on the 1st of July next year and grandfather the other acts for the following 2 years? Was there any thought process in doing it that way? So those acts, so you could actually get the new one started whilst you are, removing the others. I'm just a bit worried about that. Whoops, she's going to stop right away today, that's it. I am a bit worried that we've put ourselves in a situation where we've got this grandfathering clause, we can't grandfather for 2 years these, while you guys get this moving.
Senator, what I would say to that is the longer we keep going with 3 acts, the harder it is for us to make these changes.
No, I realise, and that's what I'm saying to you. Why can't this new legislation start on the 1st anyway, but just grandfather the others until the 1st of July, so you can start transitioning all that over much quicker? So it will stop anyway, because it's going to stop. If the other acts are going to stop on the 1st of July 2026, yeah?
Well, they're closed to new applications. They're not repealed because they stay in place. The preservation of all of the existing entitlements is predicated on the VEA and the DERCA continuing, but being to provide the legislative basis for the benefits, but they'll be closed to new applications. So it's not a matter of... So the bill in front of the Parliament at the moment doesn't repeal the VEA and the DERCA. It closes them to new applications.
Okay.
And I think, as I said last time, if you were going to build a system for veterans' entitlements, you wouldn't start with 3 acts. And so that's the key driver for us in terms of getting it closed, recognising that we're not moving into something new, we're moving into something that we understand well and opening it to more people. The reduction in or the focusing of our effort on a single act will make a significant difference to our ability to process claims and manage the system.
Okay. In that regard too, Senator, one of the strongest bits of feedback that we got in the multiple consultation processes that we ran around the development of this bill was an interest in that grandparenting. Particularly around a VEA cohort who are on a rate of pension or payment, compensation payment under the VA, who just want that left alone, and that will continue to be paid under the VA, and that's been an assurance to them that is not being disrupted as in any part of this legislation.
Okay.
So that will
Can I just ask Mr. Brown, you mentioned about consultation. Since we last had the hearing, You've had other consultation with the veterans community through, I think, various forums the minister's hosted.
That's correct, Senator.
Yeah.
We've undertaken forums in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth, with future forums to come, including in Brisbane. Those sessions have been broadly supportive of the changes within the bill that are given effect to by passage of the bill.
Has there been anything that's come out of those forums that's just worth, like, in light of the conversation and the questions by Senator Lambie and others, but that you've taken on board, or has it been the same, same commentary that we've had prior to the previous hearing?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, much of the discussion that occurs in the question and answer session of these forums goes particularly to individual client cases and situations that have happened today or in the past with those client cases, rather than systemic or system-based concerns that are being proposed in the bill.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to go with this date. So is this because you're not starting in July 2026 because you just don't think you're going to be ready? Or is this just is this how long do you think it's going to take you? Or is this just a date by the government, this is when it's going to start? I think I just need to try and get my head around that. I mean, it's 22 months. It's nearly 2 years away.
I think, as Mr Keffer's said, Senator, it's not been driven by the department's ability to implement the changes from a practical perspective. I mean, the practical limitation on the department, if the bill passes through Parliament, will be that the provisions of the bill don't commence until 1 July 2026. The reasons the provisions of the bill don't commence till 1 July 2026 is not about implementation. It's more about the need for the veteran community to feel comfortable with the transition process to the new arrangements, understand how they would affect them, and to make some informed choices about what claims they want to make under the current arrangements and what claims they want to make under the new arrangements. There's not necessarily an implementation barrier from our perspective.
Okay.
Interestingly, Senator, at some of these consultation forums that we have undertaken, there are divergent views on that question about the timeframe of commencement. So some people are advocating for it to commence earlier, whilst others are advocating for it to commence later.
I should, and Mr Gibbs already made this point, Senator, but we can't also take for granted what the passage of the bill through Parliament. So obviously the time frame for that would affect our implementation capacity, but at this point in time, that wouldn't be a concern.
And what about, making the veterans aware of this? What sort of campaign are you running, or are you going to be running? How are you going to make them aware of, what do we send out, letters, what's emails, what's the go? Because I do believe you've obviously got contact with them all.
Indeed. Well, Senator, I might start and then I'll defer to Mr Brown. So the first point is, I mean, the history of this process is obviously it started with the Royal Commission's interim report. There's been 2 periods of more than 3 months of detailed public consultation, including earlier this year when we released, or when the government released, a exposure draft of the legislation, the draft explanatory memorandum and a marked up version of the legislation. So in terms of, and then that's been supported by a significant number of public forums and questions and answers, and the Minister himself's been at a number of those. The process post passage then allows us to, in a range of forums, in person, online, correspondence on our website, to say, here's the change, here's when it starts. One of the features we used in the public consultation process was a series of cameos to help people understand the implications. So there would have to be, and there will be, a significant program of explanation and information provision so that no one can get to the commencement and not understand what's happening and what the implications are. Clearly the advocates will have a significant role in that. The ex-service organisations will have a significant role in that. But as I say, we've gone into this process, and the Royal Commission in its report commended the process that's been gone through in the consultation on the bill that's before the Parliament. We will take that same approach into the communication once we have the final form of the bill at the end of the parliamentary process.
No, I understand that. I understand that, you know, you have your service organisations out there and you have your advocates, but there's plenty of people out there that don't even use them.
No.
They do their own. So my thing is getting from me to someone that doesn't use any of that, you're going to use your, send out emails as you're going along, that sort of thing.
It might be emails, it might be vet affairs, it might be our website, it will be our social media presence. We will run forums like the one that the Chair's just referred to make ourselves available to ensure that people and veterans understand what's happening and how it affects them. And part of that too will be making contact through the VSOs and through Defence to make sure we're connecting with serving members as well.
Yeah, because as soon as this goes in, you're going to get a bump. Once this goes through the floor, you're going to get a bump because people are going to go, what the hell? I don't know anything. I mean, they've got no idea what's going on up here, most of them. That's how it works. They've got no idea. All they're going to see is, I'm just a bit worried about them.
So certainly, Senator, the department has been funded to do the work necessary to communicate these changes to the veteran community. And Mr Keffer's just gone through how that might look and feel for a veteran and in terms of our engagement with them. You are right, we need to be ready to ensure that veterans understand, at least at a general level, from passage of legislation, what's changing, and then that will be filtered down to a more and more detailed understanding for them, for those who want to know that detail. As Mr Brown's indicated and Mr Kefford, we're constrained somewhat by the passage of the undertaking of the parliamentary process. So we need to await the finalisation of that before we can effectively flick the switch and start getting that messaging out. But we will be ready to do it.
The observation you've made about bumps, I guess, Senator, in terms of claims intake as well, is something that we have anticipated, particularly post 1 July 2026, with particularly, I think, DIRCA-only veterans currently testing their eligibility for gold cards, which will be open up eligibility for them for the first time. And again, that's something that we have thought about, and noting also the comments that Mr Kefford made about demand-driven funding. Some resources have been provided. Some resources have been provided to the department in anticipation.
I think my problem is this could be through in 4 weeks' time. What's your plan? Yet I haven't got. Where's your letter? What's going out to them? This could be through in 4 or 6 weeks' time, and we're sitting here discussing on how you're going to tell your thousands of veterans that are on your books what's just happened. Because it's going to have to go. You'll go as soon as this goes through, whether it starts on the 1st of July 2026 or not. You've just put that legislation through. That's when you should be explaining, say, right, today this legislation has gone through.
And Senator,
this is what it looks like. I'd actually like to see what that rollout looks like from the time. This will need a backup, this legislation. I want to see what it looks like when it's put through and whether or not you are ready. Sure. So I don't have a heap of veterans out there going, what the hell, and in panic buttons.
Well, Senator, as Mr Hills just said, the department has been funded to communicate this process, and we've made the point already today that part of the calculation of the timing turns on the commencement timing turns on having time to do this. I'm happy to take on notice the communication plan for.
I would like to see that.
As you've just described it.
Because I just find it really difficult if I'm going to,
Yes, absolutely.
That they're going to put this through the Senate, and if it's going to put people's lives at risk, because it's just going to tip them over the edge and go, what now?
Just to give you some assurance there too, Senator, as we've outlined, communication is, you're right, we can't wait, and communication's already happening. We're doing the forums. We have a website set up. There's something like 48, I'm going to say, and look at my colleague for a nod, cameos on the website. There's a marked up version of the MERCA amongst the other pieces of legislation that will be affected. So the communication efforts has started. We can always do more.
But are you going to send a letter out to all of them by email and explain that this has just happened, this new legislation, this is what it does? And you can go to the website, not waiting for them to be not in a good place or anything else, like a lot of them are out there that are under the department, obviously, that have especially psychological injuries, that they're reading something in the paper or hearing something on the news they have no idea about, because that'll startle them.
Well, Senator, we've taken on notice the communications plan, but yes, the communications plan includes direct communication from us to veterans.
Okay.
Just
you go.
I might just also mention on that point that a comm strategy or plan, it might be something if you do come back to us and maybe something that the committee could look at maybe in a more private capacity if there's some other sensitivities that you might have about sharing that, but sharing it with Senator Lambie and a few other members of the committee, that might be something that if you'd be willing to consider. And I think I take the point Senator Lambie's making is that, you know, it's fair to say a large number of veterans do go to her in her office for assistance. I mean, I get some, but I think Jackie gets the bulk of them. It might be something worth at some point
that's a helpful
to talk about, just to, I guess, help you, but also help us manage, I guess, the anxiety that can be created out of these processes for a lot of people. They're not sure what's happened, and I think we want to send a reassurance that it's a positive change for the community and for members of the veterans and their families. And I think
got to rebuild trust again, you guys. So you're going to have to every time you
because there's a lot of good work that the department and others have done.
You're going to have to notify
and we just want to
them.
make sure that that people aren't reading into things that they probably shouldn't read into, and that this is just the processes that we're going through. So anything you could share, maybe take on board at a later stage. Maybe we could convene in a private capacity, Senator Lambie, but something for the department to come back to the committee on.
Senator, that's a helpful suggestion. Thank you, and I welcome the spirit in which it's made. We'll speak with the minister, but we'll certainly provide the document, and I think it would be useful to seek that counsel from the committee.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Kiffin.
Oh, sorry.
No, after you, Senator Lambie. All yours.
Does the bill assist to make gold cards more accessible for veterans?
Yes, it does, Senator.
How does it? Can you just explain to me, Mr. Hill, how that works?
So, as previously outlined, a DIRCA-only veteran today has no access at all to a gold card, nor do they have access to the other special safety net payments and the like, or education schemes assistance. The bill will actually open up the pathway for DIRCA veterans to access and receive a gold card or the other safety net eligibilities.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if you'd finished. I was going to, and that's of particular benefit to cohorts like national servicemen who didn't deploy overseas or CMF reservists.
Yeah, okay.
The other aspects
that will assist them, Luke. That now with those NASHOs out there.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
The ones that don't have many that were deployed have VEA coverage, but many were not deployed and do not.
That's right.
They are covered under the provisions of the transitional provisions in the DIRCA, which apply the rules of the 71 or 1930 Act, which have very different approaches to compensation. Okay. So they will have an ability to claim under the MERCA from 1 July 2026 for things related to their national service time. The other aspect in terms of gold cards is, I mentioned before, the introduction of an additional disability amount. Thank you, Mr. Hill. That new eligibility, that new payment type in the MERCA will come with a gold card. And importantly, if a veteran qualifies for that or is eligible for that payment and then passes away, there will be an arrangement where a gold card will then, their surviving partner would also become eligible for a gold card in the same way as they do for EDA under the VA. So there are a number of ways that gold card eligibility is expanded by the bill.
This bill doesn't fix this gold card issue. So when the gold card goes to the widow, or the gold card is passed over, once the gold card holder passes, that gold card is then passed to their widow, correct?
No, it's not. Well, I know that's the way it's envisaged, Senator. It's the partner becomes eligible for their own gold card in their own right under certain provisions. Okay, it's not a transferal of the veteran's gold card.
Do we have any rules in about this? Because I don't know how many over the years I've had where women have endured with those Vietnam veterans for many years, and then once their kids have gone and once they hit their 60s, gone, I've done my bit for you in the country, I am leaving, I've had it, using them as an example. Then they go and remarry and they're with that person for 2 years, and the person that's basically looked after them their whole life while they have not been well, receives nothing.
Yeah, there's
They still
nothing.
haven't
There's
fixed it.
nothing in this bill that would address that situation, Senator.
Okay. Is that large numbers? Do you know? Have we done any numbers on that sort of thing
Would be
going
a-
on?
I think
It
it'd
is a problem.
It's certainly something that's been raised
I know this hasn't
with
got-
us
I
in
don't
other
feel that-
contexts, and this, as Mr Brown says, continues the current arrangements. It doesn't change it. I'm happy to take on notice, Senator. I don't have that in front of me at the moment.
I will say, Senator, that separation is different to divorce as well. In terms of if there's a separated partner, there are provisions in the MERCA which do allow benefits to flow to the partner in the case of
I
separation.
missed that. Right.
But it is more difficult when a divorce has occurred.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Chair, can I just make a quick comment on that?
Sure, Senator Fawcett.
Yeah, look, there has been some work done with DBA, led by a veteran's ex-wife here from South Australia, into looking at the various scenarios, including somebody who's given up career, etc., to care for a veteran, but then had to leave and end up being divorced because of domestic violence. So there are a number of scenarios that there have been some one-off fixes, I understand, to try and address, but it is a systemic issue that we should be looking at.
Yeah, and thank you, Senator. And they're the sort of provisions I'm talking about. There are deeming provisions that relate to partners, which generally apply where the partner is living with the veteran, but where the partner is not living with the veteran, because in the circumstances that you've described, we apply provisions that say but for a temporary absence, and we apply those provisions very beneficially to work through those for the benefit of the partner.
Look, we're just going to suspend for a few minutes, have just a very brief mid-afternoon break, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes, but maybe a 5-minute break. Okay.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Resume, and Senator Lambie.
I do apologise because I too have not had time to go through the 7 big volumes of the Royal Commission, right? So I am trying to get my head around it. That'll be my weekend. That's probably why I'm not flying home. It'll be just lying on the couch and going through it all. But obviously my office is playing catch up and trying to do it, but they're telling me about 22 pages of the Royal Commission's recommendations, that were 73 in total, have recommendations to look to be relevant to the DVA in this legislation, in this bill. That's why I was a bit concerned about, is there recommendations in there that do directly or could improve this bill that could be put in there? I'm assuming your department is still looking. Obviously, I'll have a bit more in a week. If you just give me a week to go through them and say, well, actually, that probably should be in there.
I don't want to.
Is the minister still sort of going, all right, let's have a look at this if something does come up and it's worthy to put in?
Senator, as I said before, we like you, received the report on Monday.
Okay.
We are working through it with the Minister personally and with the colleagues. I suppose what we would say is there is the bill in front of us, first of all, comes from recommendation 1 of the interim report. It's about harmonising what we have. Whether or not there'd been a report, it's always possible there might be further government policy decisions that require legislation in the future. But to answer your question, is there anything in the report from Monday that affects the harmonisation process? My advice to the committee is no. Okay. Are there matters that could, and Mr Brown mentioned the one about service differential, on which a view has not been formed, but even that is not in the legislation.
No, but they do have the chapter on the entitlements and claims processing, so have we read this and taken that into account?
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Senator, most of the commentary, most of the reference to the VETS bill are in Chapter 25, which is the claims processing chapter that you've referred to.
Yeah.
The references are things like, and I'm not going to cover them comprehensively, but a note that the VETS bill includes legislative amendments that will consolidate, standardise and simplify the authority for information exchange between Defence, ADF and DVA. That's on page 408. 409, there's a note that we're expanding presumptive liability provisions. So my read, and again, you know, with the strong caveat that we're all taking in the report, is that the references in Chapter 25 that are scattered throughout Chapter 25 are noting that the bill is already doing things to progress topics of interest in the final report.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And what I'd add, Senator, is there's also significant commentary there about how we DVA deliver the legislation.
Okay.
So, for example, you asked before about is there anything in here that affects transition?
Yeah.
Not the legislative basis and the entitlements, how we administer transition, absolutely. There's significant commentary about how we and Defence can do that in a way that the Commission thinks is better. But the commentary in the report goes to things that we have to do rather than needing to change the underlying legislation is how I would characterise that. So as Mr Brown's picked up, this bill gives us, or proposes, to create a power to have presumptive decision-making, which will absolutely streamline processing for a significant list of conditions. That's already in the bill. The report, in effect, endorses that being in the bill as a positive step from the interim report. It doesn't lead us to think that there are further amendments required to the bill that's before the Parliament.
Right.
Now, that's not to say, as I said, there may be other decisions the government makes in its response that requires legislation. For example, the recommendation 122, but that, again, that's not about the bill that's in front of the Parliament.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Sorry, Senator. Importantly, in that same chapter, the Royal Commission does note that the VETS bill as it currently stands will result in a harmonised scheme in line with the principles recommended by the Productivity Commission, which informed their interim report recommendation 1.
Yeah, okay. All right. Is there any reasons why the words veteran and family were excluded from the bill?
Yes. The word veteran, the advocacy around the word veteran has been to include a definition of the word veteran in the bill. Now, the bill is amending 3 existing pieces of legislation. It's actually amending more than that, but 3 primary pieces of legislation. The MERCA for the last 20 years has not, in a mechanical sense, used the word veteran. It refers to things like serving members of the ADF, former serving members of the ADF, part-time reservists, cadets, as in school-age cadets. To define a term in an Act that then is not used in the provisions of the Act, in terms of the advice and the conversations that we've had, would create ambiguity around the proper interpretation of that term. So we explored the topic.
Why don't we just use the term that the US does? It means a person who served in active military, naval, air force, or who was discharged or released thereon under conditions other than dishonourable. It's not
a difficulty in defining the term. It's the fact that putting the term in the Act, it would have no mechanical impact, and the term is already defined for the purposes that are being put forward by the veteran community in the Veterans Recognition Act. And that is to recognise the special nature of the term and the service provided. So, as I said, we have no philosophical opposition to the term being included in the Act, but the legal position is that it would create ambiguity in terms of the operation of the Act.
And we did have this conversation explicitly with Parliamentary Council as part of the drafting, Senator, and we did touch on this last time. I recognise you weren't at the hearing, but we did touch on it last time. Because the term wouldn't be otherwise used in the MERCA, the advice is that it would add potentially confusion, unnecessary complexity, and open up pathways for litigation that are unhelpful. In terms of status recognition, as Mr Brown said, the Veterans Recognition Act achieves that purpose. And so it's on that basis that the term's not in the MERCA.
But it didn't give us a term. It didn't say what a veteran was in that Recognition Act. All it says was you're going to start bloody looking after us, which did not work, as I had told the DFWA at the time.
It does have a specific provision which defines the term veteran in that Act.
Oh, it does.
And it did so in a way that was, as Mr Kefford said, was about that recognition element, which is really I think the rationale in the advocacy that we've received around this piece of legislation.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that last time somebody said it was unhelpful and creates ambiguity.
To have it, the advice we had in the drafting process is that to include a definition in an act that's not subsequently used does risk that, because as Mr. Brown said, the references in the operative provisions of the MERCA go to serving members and former serving members. They don't actually use the term veteran.
Let's not worry about that at the moment. Okay, I believe the War Widows have had a bit of an issue with the widow to wholly dependent partner. I'm assuming you've done that because it's 21st century and we're doing the right thing, that there isn't just a widower out there anymore, it can be a mixture.
Senator, we're aware that amongst the veteran community there's mixed views on that term. It's not a term that we use in our normal communications, but the reason why we haven't sought to change that definition as process is there has not been a consensus of what it should be. I think everyone would agree that it's not necessarily a contemporary description of modern families,
yeah.
But absent a clear and supported view amongst the community, and given, as I say, that we don't use it except in that context in the legislation, it's not something that we've sought to amend.
All right. I'm not getting any complaints. I just picked it up in one of the things. I was just wondering. I can see why, because we do have those older war widows out there, and they've always carried that with honour.
Exactly.
Good for them. But we do have to include. It has to be more inclusive.
And perhaps for greater clarity, Senator, the department made a supplementary submission to the committee and acknowledging that it was only lodged recently. That supplementary submission does actually go to that particular question and outlines the current circumstances and the fact that there are divergent views about what the term should be, and that work is currently underway to try and settle what the correct phrasing should be moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Just according to your handbook, page 5 of the Green Booklet, it says the bill is expected to enhance the Commissioner's ability to grant special assistance to veterans and their dependents. What does that look like? What does that special assistance look like? What's he granting?
It's flexibility, Senator. So
they can override something if need be.
Yeah. So there's an existing provision in the MERCA at section 424. It's a special assistance provision. It has some limitations in terms of its application at the moment, which are very specific to both the MERCA and to a degree the VEA. Essentially, the wording of the provision is being broadened to allow the Commission to consider, it's not a single individual, it's the entire Commission, to consider circumstances which were not foreseen in the transition to these new arrangements, and to provide, as per the provision, special assistance to alleviate any unintended consequences in the transition from the current arrangements to the new arrangements.
Okay.
So if there is an unexpected outcome from, and we're not anticipating this, but this is the reason that the provision is there, because there may be things that we've been through this thoroughly, Senator, but you want the assurance that if there are things that we haven't foreseen, that we have the ability to deal with them on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Okay. And this bill requires that for a worsening of a new condition under DIRCA, it must first be accepted under the MERCA before the threshold is met to access particular MERCA entitlements. Can you explain how this works in practical terms?
Yeah, so that's a separate thing. It's a separate issue to the section 424.
Okay.
This is a provision, so unrelated, but I'm happy to talk you through the topic. This relates to access to some of the benefits under the MERCA for people transitioning from the old acts into the MERCA, primarily DIRCA veterans. The primary example where this applies is gold card eligibility, but it also applies to what are known as Section 80 payments, which are additional payments for children, and access to education schemes. and the additional disability amount I've referenced before. But the gold card's probably the easiest example, Senator. Under the MERCA, to be eligible for a gold card, you can become eligible in multiple ways, but one of the ways is being determined to have 60 impairment points when you put in a permanent impairment claim. For DIRCA veterans coming across, they'll have to meet one of two other requirements, that is have a liability claim accepted after 1 July 2026 or have a 5-point impairment worsening since their last assessment under the DIRCA. So, practical example, DIRCA veteran puts in a claim after 1 July 2026 for permanent impairment under the MERCA. We do a permanent impairment assessment. They have 70 impairment points. Their last assessment under the DIRCA, which will baseline under the MERCA, was 60 impairment points. They've had the 5-point worsening. They get a gold card.
Okay. I just... do you have any idea what Brian Briggs is on about when he says that he has that an opportunity may have been missed to improve the legislation? What's his... Do you know what his problems are?
I wouldn't want to put words in Mr Briggs's mouth, but I have spoken to him, Senator. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago in Sydney.
Because he's
look, and with hesitation, one of the concerns he expressed to me is he sees the statements of principles regime as being inflexible.
Yeah, we all do.
What I said to Mr Briggs in response to that was...
I say, is this what he's talking about? So if there's an opportunity here to do something about those bloody SOPs, they're either good or they're not. So there's nothing in between with those SOPs, and they're extremely rigid. And this has been a significant problem. Has that problem been fixed? Of how rigid, if you don't tick those boxes in those SOPs, do we have some room to move now? Has that been fixed?
So yes.
Okay.
And obviously Mr Briggs has a view on this, and you can seek his view. The conversation I had with Mr Briggs is I actually think where he sees inflexibility in the SOPs is actually not the SOPs themselves. It's often an administrative issue in terms of the particular claim that's before the delegate, and I'm very happy to work through those examples with Mr Briggs, and I've said that to him. But Senator, just in terms of the bill itself, there are two new liability tests being introduced into the bill which do not use the SOPs. The first is the one that we've already mentioned, the presumptive provision.
That's right.
So if you have a condition that's covered under that presumptive instrument and you meet the service circumstances that qualify you for that, then the SOPs are not going to be used in determining that claim. And in fact, issues relating to causation, so whether your actual defence service caused the claim condition, do not need to be investigated. It will just be presumed that that is the case. The other test is a new liability test which relates to injuries and deaths that occur while a person's on duty. If a person has an injury or death while they are on duty, liability will be accepted. We do not need to apply the SOPs. That is something that is being done in this bill. So I'll give you another concrete example. A heart attack, someone dies from a heart attack while on duty. At the moment, we have to, say, diagnose them with ischemic heart disease, go and find the ischemic heart disease
That's
SOP.
now been corrected, has it? So if they have a heart attack on duty, that's it, we're done, that's fixed now.
Under this bill, if it passes Parliament, it's enough that they had the heart attack while on duty, and we do not need to apply the SOP.
Okay, all right. So, the current definitions and coverage of the liability. I want to talk about this. How this bill is going to address the. So you've addressed that, but we still haven't addressed the. We still haven't addressed the sports. So. We've addressed that bit. If you have a heart attack, that's fine. But let's say, military people, this has been a problem for a long time, that part of their unique surface is they've got to stay fit and they go out and do these outside sports. To do that, that's still in this grey area. We have not fixed that. If they're doing a sport, why can't we just cover them? It was where if a commanding officer ticked off and said, yep, you can play football for the season, not a problem, that was accepted. Is that still widely done? Or have we fixed this area?
It's not covered in the bill, Senator. Certainly the situation is as you describe in terms of if someone is doing a sporting activity to stay fit and that is expected, authorised or encouraged as part of their defence service, liability will be covered for that, any condition that arises from that sporting activity. Again, if there are fringe cases where this is proving difficulty, I'm more than happy to look at those, and the policy and the provisions are very broad. The issue being if you start to define these things more narrowly, you lose the flexibility to deal with cases on a case-by-case basis. I mean, and that's the conversation that I've had on those provisions in the past. Not aware of this being a systemic difficulty at the moment, but if there are cases, more than happy to look at that. I would see the current provisions as being broad enough to accommodate most claims where there's sporting activity being undertaken by a current serving member.
Okay. So it's not systemic in there? It's not...
Well, I'm not seeing evidence of that, Senator, but I'm happy to look at it if there are multiple rejections of claims relating to, sporting activities occurring. I'm just not seeing it myself.
Okay. The Repatriation Medical Authority Board, how many people do we have on that?
I'm not entirely sure of those current numbers, Senator. We'd have to come back to you on notice with the numbers that are on the RMA today.
Okay. And that's a make-up of what, usually health professionals?
Epidemiologists usually, Senator.
So that's people with specialist skills in, I'm probably not going to do it justice, Senator, but essentially things that cause diseases.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not really fussed, but I know there's a couple of people who said, well, why don't we have a former military personnel person on there? I'm not fussed whether there is or isn't, but apparently a couple of people are. I'm a bit concerned about that.
I think given the role, Senator, that's one where the primacy is on medical judgment rather than...
Yeah.
That goes to causation and circumstances in which we might accept something. There's probably an area where, you put a primacy on medical experience.
Right. And I'm assuming if they need to know something on how defence works or how this has occurred, they come and talk to someone within the department. Do you know what I mean? Because they go hand in hand. You have your medical practitioners, but sometimes they need to say, this is how it works over here and this is why this has happened, so they can help make informed decisions.
The RMA is a separate statutory authority, an independent statutory authority, and for very good reasons is independent from the department. Certainly we have a relationship where we can talk through issues, but they do operate independently. In terms of the way that they access advice on defence context or military-related matters, I'm probably not in a position to answer that question. Yeah.
Do you think I could get an answer on that at some stage?
Can
you just ask me? I just want to know how they do it. Yeah, that's great. Now, I want to go back to not just the sporting thing, but it's not a big issue either, but there has been some issues around, I certainly know about it, but about having shore leave. Or, if you're off a ship or say you're up in Townsville and they say, we're going to give you 4 hours notice, you get injured 4 hours off this evening, it's a quick decision, it's made, you go in, you get injured, you're not covered.
Yeah, again, Senator, the test in the MERCA, apart from, this is speaking generally because there's obviously a degree of detail here, but the broad tests are arising out of the rendering of defence service or but for the rendering of defence service. So someone doesn't need to necessarily be on duty at the time an incident occurs.
Yeah.
And while on deployment overseas, there's obviously many things that would arise out of the fact that they were on deployment or but for the fact they were on deployment. Now, there are, again, some fringe cases where someone might be doing something that takes their activities out of the realm of rendering defence service into a personal sphere, where they're making judgment calls about activities that they want to pursue while they're overseas in a foreign country. And again, there's flexibility in the provisions. There's case law which guides decision making, but it's not something that's specifically defined in the provisions of the existing legislation, and the bill does nothing to adjust that in terms of putting some hard lines around when someone is or isn't considered to be rendering defence service while overseas.
So do you just look at the mitigating circumstances when you're in a situation like that? So, okay, you haven't had sleep for 2 days, you've been on picket, you've been out bush, we've just let you go, you are tired, you are not watching what you do, you fall down the stairs. Yeah,
and look, and the test, and I hate to come off as too technical, Senator, but the case law basically requires the decision maker to look at what is authorised, expected or encouraged in connection to a person's defence service. So in the circumstance you've just outlined, I would say that would meet those requirements.
Okay.
But there's examples where people undertake risky behaviour while overseas, which is not being expected, authorised or encouraged as part of their defence service. And then that's where some question as to whether liability should be accepted comes into the decision-making process.
I know, but then that comes back to, because they've been tired, if they've just come out of a war zone and you've given them a day's leave and they've been able to do that, they're tired, they're psychologically not thinking well, and that's when that risky behaviour...
And that's why, again, the Act doesn't define, because once you define, you lose the flexibility.
Okay, the VA and the Merkel provide 2 different standards of proof when assessing compensation claims under the statements of principles. I think this is what you were talking about with the reasonable both thesis or your balance of probabilities. Apparently these standards have been labelled as inherently unfair by a Professor, Nick Saunders, the chair of the RMA. So does the bill now establish a single fair standard of proof? I think you went over this. What is this? What does that mean? Explain this to me.
I'm not aware of those comments being made by the RMA. The bill retains the current different standards of proof. So the differential is between peacetime service and what's referred to as non-warlike and warlike service, so operational type service. For peacetime service, the standard of proof is reasonable satisfaction, or the test being balance of probabilities. So is it more likely than not that the thing related to defence service?
This is for peace?
This is for peacetime. For operational type injuries and diseases and deaths, the standard of proof is the reverse criminal standard of proof. So the department has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the condition claimed does not relate to that operational type service. It's often referred to as the reasonable hypothesis test. The bill that is a feature of the Veterans Entitlements Act. It was a feature of the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act in 2004, and the bill does not change that status quo.
Okay, and I think we've sort of touched on this. I'm not sure if you have much else to say, but obviously the Australian Lawyers Alliance has raised in their submission the essential for, once again, for the option to utilise these legal representation assistance at all stages of the claims process. So I'm assuming this is why you need to get your advocates ready.
This is again largely a status quo position, Senator. At a hearing of the Veterans Review Board, a person cannot bring in a solicitor or a lawyer to represent them, someone who's legally trained. Neither can the department. It's a non-adversarial merits review process. The bill is maintaining that position.
And to your point on advocates, Senator, one of the it's the level 4 advocates that are trained to assist in that context. But neither the department nor the veteran in front of the review board is represented, and that's a very deliberate process to take some of the adversarial nature out of that merits review process.
Are you expecting more now that you've got this other lot now can use the VRB? Because what's our level 4 advocates look like up there? I imagine they'd be quite slim on the ground, yeah?
I think it's I think it's level 3 for
big
VRB
pardon,
and
sorry.
level 4
okay.
for AAT. I don't have the.
Yes, you're right. Sorry.
I don't
Okay.
have those numbers in front of me, Senator, but certainly we could always, we're trying to encourage, and through the proposal that's out for consultation that Mr. Kefford outlined before, we're trying to encourage good advocates to enter into the Veterans Advocacy System. The bill as well, one of the barriers that we hear about from prospective advocates is the complexity of the legislation arrangements at the moment is a barrier for them to enter into being advocates and assisting veterans and their families. So one of the desired outcomes of harmonisation and simplification is to make it easier for new advocates to enter into the system to become advocates.
Okay.
Similarly, Senator, that complexity is also a reason why a lot express a desire to leave advocacy.
Yes.
And we've received feedback that suggests that they see this bill as a reason for them to stay in and continue to provide advocacy services moving forward.
Okay. Can you tell me why we're not clarifying clinical onset as suggested by the committee?
Clinical onset isn't in the bill. It's not in the MERCA. Clinical onset is a term that's used in the SOPs, and essentially the way that the SOP uses the terminology is you have an exposure or an activity that's said to have caused the claim condition, and clinical onset has to be within a certain time frame, and that time frame set by the RMA, supported by their assessment of the sound medical scientific evidence that they are legislated to consider. Obviously, the theory being if onset is a long way away from the exposure of the activity, it couldn't have been caused by that exposure or activity according to the medical science. The controversy around the term clinical onset currently relates to a federal court case known as Boys, where for some spondylosis conditions the SOPs were worded in a way that made it sound like clinical onset was to be set at the date imaging occurred, which is obviously doesn't make sense for a degenerative condition where you might have had the condition for quite a long time before having the imaging. Those SOPs have been adjusted to make it clear that a clinical onset date can be set well before any imaging has occurred. If a medical practitioner can provide evidence that clinical onset was at an earlier date, then the decision maker is no longer bound under the wording of those SOPs to apply the date of imaging. So that's been corrected in.
So this is so this has been corrected now with the presumptive injuries fix the problems with the onset and dates of effect. Because sometimes that's the other problem that we have here, which unless you can tell me it's been fixed, I can't see it, is that, you do it from the time the claim goes in rather than you backdate to the claim, but that injury could have been done 12 months beforehand.
So presumptive liability,
right?
the presumptive liability provisions will not use the concept of clinical onset. It's not a factor for presumptive liability.
Right.
For the claims that go through the current SOP process and will continue to post the bill, the decision maker will still have to investigate when the condition clinically onset. And it's simply when the veteran first started to experience the signs and symptoms of the condition. And the process, in my mind, is quite simple. It's asking their treating doctor, when did the veteran, or even the veteran themselves, when did you start to first suffer the signs and symptoms of the claimed condition? So, and that should be able to set back as far as beneficially possible. In terms of date of effect, Senator...
So explain to me then how these the onset problems are having with the psych injuries denied because not having events within certain timeframes due to the SOPs.
I would have to look at those individual cases, Senator. I suspect the issue is not... Well, without looking at them, I am going out on a limb here, but I suspect the issue is the way that the decision makers considered the medical evidence as opposed to a problem with the SOPs. But very happy to look at the case.
Okay. What about? So my guys have just found some numbers. So they're telling me what they've found is there's only 11 level 4 advocates out there, and 75 level 3. What is your What do your proposed numbers look like over the next 6 months to deal with this new legislation coming through? What would be your required number? Do we have something that we are working with for those advocates? Like, is there an actual number to say this is the amount of advocates that we need, these are the levels that we need, and this is where we need them? Have we done that?
Senator, the focus of the work on encouraging people to either remain or become advocates has been at the claims lodgement. The focus has been at the claims lodgement end,
Right.
Including because the numbers of matters that go through the tribunal are relatively low. It's certainly the case that we are keen, and as Mr Hills outlined, particularly for the advocates that are involved in the review process, they tend to be the more experienced ones, and so. Certainly it's the case that we would like to encourage and support more people to receive that level of training. But the other part of this is there's not necessarily a direct link between the changes here and the volume of business that might end up in front of the tribunal.
Okay.
Well, arguably, Senator, there'll be less volume going to the tribunal than there is today. Currently, a DIRCA veteran's claim can only be appealed for external review to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, soon to be Administrative Reviews Tribunal. With the change in the single review pathway that has been mentioned previously, starting 60 days after royal assent, those claims are likely to be resolved now at the VRB level, to avoid the need to engage in the ART. And noting earlier that level 3 advocates are the ones who can support veterans before the VRB, as opposed to level 4 advocates who are required at the AAT.
Okay. So is there a reason we don't have legal representation on the new Institute board? Is it Institute?
I can't remember the categories of membership that are proposed in the consultation paper, Senator. The intent was to have people with experience of the system and experience of military service. The process in consultation with the working group didn't come at that from a professional, as in qualification, professional basis of saying we need a lawyer and 3 accountants and someone else. But as the board is constituted of this body, if it's established, then certainly having that experience would be helpful. But in the consultation paper at the moment, there is not a position, as I recall, particularly identified for a legal practitioner.
Oh, I see. Did we just have the same e-sort as we usually do around the table making decisions for us, did we?
No, Senator, this was done by a working group of the senior practising advocates. It was an ESOT working group, but the members, it was established under ESOT, but the members were, including the regional managers and a number of people who are deeply engaged in this process on a regular basis.
Right, I see. So there's no lawyers on that? There's no lawyers?
Not as proposed in the consultation paper, Senator.
So two things. First of all, the body doesn't exist. It's a proposal. And secondly, the way in which the paper canvasses membership isn't based on professional qualifications, it's based on experience. Now, someone who has experience of the system might also be a lawyer. It's also open for the process to say...
I know on experience, but lawyers on that side have experience fighting against you. That's why we have them at the table, so we can get this right. This has been a big problem all along because you have listened to us at the table. We don't have legal expertise. This is where you are going terribly wrong, DVA. We've got to have ESOTs. got to have a lawyer of their own representation that knows that knows what goes on legally within the Department of Veterans Affairs, because they're making decisions where they can't get advice because DVA says it's going to be fine, it's all right. I don't want to go back to those old days. True. I'm sorry, but that's like sitting me there. I'm not a legal expert. I can tell you everything that's wrong and what's going on, but on how to fix that and whether or not that move you're about to make or that piece of legislation you're about to change, whether that is going to be valuable for the veteran. Service organisations are not good at that because they don't have the expertise, and I'm calling them out for it today, and I've called them out for it in the past. And it has really hurt us in the past by them just saying, and DVA driving it down their throat saying it's great change, and convincing them when they have no legal expertise to be making decisions on behalf of thousands of us.
So as part of that consultation process on the proposed institute, I have personally written to all the law societies seeking their view on the composition of that institute. So we are taking the views of legally trained people on board, and certainly if there's a strong view or that comes forward for a person that must be legally trained to be on that board, it's going to be considered very carefully.
Okay, yeah. I just quickly, I actually just only have one more question. Hey guys, can we just quickly talk about the 104,000? That's the educational one. Yeah,
that's not educational. That's the Section 80 payment that I was referring to before, Senator. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so can you just go back into and explain? I think I might have missed it when you went into this one, but I'm just a bit worried about the separation of the spouses.
Yeah.
And I know this is a difficult area.
Yeah.
And I talk, but there has been some issues with it. Mostly it's great, but when they separate and then we're trying to decide who's getting the money, that. I'm not sure what you do about that, to be honest, but...
So you didn't miss anything, Senator. We didn't go into it in any degree of detail. I just referenced it in a suite of benefits that were relevant to another topic we were covering. But under Section 80, essentially is an additional payment, an amount probably very close to what you've just mentioned, that is paid to a veteran currently, where they're determined to have 80 or more impairment points, and it's paid for each child essentially that the veteran has. The bill, obviously, the intention is that for that money to be used in some way for the benefit of the child. The bill is changing the provisions so that the payment is going to the primary carer of the child as opposed to necessarily the veteran.
So who determines that? Who determines that primary carer? Is that?
It's the current arrangements under family law arrangements.
Oh, okay. So, this is like a Centrelink type. Right? Is that what it follows off? Like if that's what Centrelink has determined you're having your child, or is that what we?
Yeah. Okay. DVA hangs off the Services Australia determination of who the primary carer is.
So that's what.
And then that's used for family tax benefit purposes and a range of other.
Okay, so it does. Yeah. All right, okay, so it just follows that.
All right. It's not like a veteran rings up and says, I'm now no longer in a relationship. It's all dependent on Centrelink.
It depends on that decision that's been made in respect to the Family Law Act. In terms of those
because
care
they'd be paying maintenance or whatever you call it these days as well.
Yeah,
okay, so
family
it's
support.
lined up with that. Okay.
And then we already do this in some regard. This is where we already do this in relation to the education payments we pay under our education schemes. They're paid to the primary carer already, so we will be aligning the payment of these provisions to what we already do in relation to education payments.
Okay, all right. So this is not. Is it this one I'm talking about? Is this the educational 104,000?
No, so the 104,000 is not education.
What is that for?
Well, I can see why it's been put to you in those terms, because it's for each. The Act uses the term eligible young person, who essentially one of the requirements is that they're in full-time education. To be eligible, but it's not intended to assist them with their education. It's to assist with the cost of children in the circumstances where one of the parents is severely impaired.
Okay.
Is that it?
Okay, you're not worried about the family law day, for family lawyers having a field day with this at all?
We already do it, Senator, in relation to education payments under the education scheme. We are aligning, as I said, with whole of government family law arrangements. It's not been a concern that's been raised with us.
Okay. I have no further questions until I go through the 7 volumes.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure we will have many discussions about this in the Senate when it does come before the chamber. On that note, can I say thank you very much to the department and also Senator Lambie for today. That concludes today's public hearing, and thanks to all the witnesses, broadcast and Hansard and the Secretariat for their assistance. On that note, the committee now stands adjourned. Thanks everyone. Have a good morning.
Thank you, Senators.